In this video, we're going to go through a few examples where we're solving equations involving radicals. So, one thing that makes solving equations that involve radicals slightly different than solving other equations, and you could do this with other equations too, is you need to check your answer, and that's really important when you're solving equations involving radicals. It's highly recommended in all equations that you check your answer, but super important, and I'll explain as I go on here. So first step in solving this may be to square both sides, right? Because if I square both sides, I get rid of the square root sign on the right hand side. Now, one thing I want to point out here is in doing this, that this side of the equation, it's got to be positive, okay? And this side of the equation need not be positive. However, it is positive in the previous step, okay? So this must be a positive number. This need not be positive. And this is one of the key reasons why it is so important to check your answer for these sort of questions, because we could possibly get an x value that works for this second equation here that does not work for this equation up here, and the reason would be due to the sign. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue solving this. So I'm going to go ahead and square this out. So I'll have x squared minus 2x plus 1, okay, and then rewrite the right hand side. Now, between these two steps, what I do, you could write this twice. In fact, in FOIL, that's basically what I did to get this here. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and bring everything over to one side of the equation. So I'll have x squared minus 2x plus 1 minus 15 plus 7x equals 0. Let's combine like terms. So x squared minus, okay, so I'm going to take this negative 2x, this plus 7x, I'm going to combine those two terms, so I'll be left with positive 5x. It's actually plus 5x, okay, and then I'm going to take this plus 1 minus 15, combine them, left with negative 14. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and factor this. So I need to think of two numbers here where, if you multiply them together, you get negative 14. And then if you add them together, you'd get 5. Okay, so you multiply them together and you get negative 14. Let's see. So what about positive 7, negative 2, right? Those two multiply together to get negative 14, and they add together to get positive 5. Okay, so set that equal to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and if either one of those terms are 0, the whole thing is 0. So set this equal to 0. Add 2 to both sides. X equals 0. X plus 7 equals 0. Subtract 7 for both sides. X equals negative 7. Okay, so those two seem to be your solution, but we need to check those, okay? So first, over here, I'm going to do the check for x equals 2. So I'm going to use this top equation to check it, okay? So I'll have, let's see, I'm going to plug in 2 for x. So 2 minus 1 equals the square root of 15 minus 7 times 2. 2 minus 1 is 3. Square root of 15 minus 14. Sorry, 2 minus 1 is not 3. 2 minus 1 is 1, right? Sorry. Okay. Alright, so 1 equals square root of 1. 1 equals 1. Checked out. Alright, and now let's do the check for x equals negative 7. So I'll have 7, or negative 7, minus 1 equals the square root of 15. 15 minus 7x. Alright, so negative 7 minus 1 is negative 8. Oops. Let's see. Instead of that being a 7, that should have been negative 7. Instead of that being an x, it should have been negative 7. Okay. So the square root of 15 minus 49, or plus 49, because negative 7 times negative 7 is plus 49. Okay, negative 8 equals the square root of 64. Negative 8 equals 8. Okay, so what happened here? This is not a solution, okay? So negative 8 does not equal 8, so it's not a solution. Remember I said it's very important to check, because what will happen is you'll have a problem with your sign. The signs won't match up, so make sure you always double check. So the only solution is not, so this is not a solution. X equals negative 7 is not a solution. 2 is the only solution. Okay, so now let's go on and do another example. We have two different radicals here. Okay, so first thing that we're going to need to do when we have multiple radicals like this is isolate one radical and then square both sides. Okay, so in the previous example, a radical was already isolated, so I could square both sides and get started like that. Here, I can't start that easily. I need to isolate one radical and then square both sides first. So I'm just going to choose to isolate this radical. So then I'm going to add the square root of x minus 1 to both sides. Okay, so x minus 1. Alright, so I'm going to square both sides, so I'll end up having 3x plus 1 equals 2 plus the square root of x minus 1 squared. Okay, 3x plus 1. So now I need to go ahead and square this out. So I'll have 2 squared, which is, actually let me go ahead and write that. 2 squared, which is 4, plus 2 times 2 times the square root of x minus 1. What am I doing? I'm using this a plus b squared equals a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. I'm using this equation here. Alright, so the formula there. Alright, so that plus x minus 1. Okay, because the square root squared is just itself. Alright, so we have 3x plus 1 equals 4 plus 4 square root of x minus 1 plus x minus 1. Alright, so now, I need to isolate the other radical and square both sides. Okay, so I still have a radical in here. Let me go ahead and simplify things up a little bit. So let's go into combine like terms. So I'll have 3x plus 1 equals, I'm going to take that 4 and that minus 1 and make that into 3. And then, so then I still have that plus x. And then I have that plus 4 square root of x minus 1. Alright, so I'm going to take that 3x and I'm going to subtract off, or plus 1, I'm going to subtract off a 3, subtract off an x, get that square root of 4x plus x minus 1 all by itself. X minus 1. Alright, so combine like terms, so that 3x minus x is 2x, and then that plus 1 minus 3 is minus 2, equals 4 square root x minus 1. Okay, okay, I can go ahead and I can simplify this a little bit by taking out a 2. Here, 2 minus 1 equals, I'm going to go ahead and make that 4, 2 times 2, x minus 1. So now I can divide both sides by 2, and this 2 cancels. So I'm going to end up with x minus 1 equals 2 times the square root of x minus 1. Okay, so now that I pretty much have that isolated, I can go ahead and square both sides. So I'm going to have x minus 1 squared equals 2 square root of x minus 1. All of this is getting squared. I'm going to bring this up over here. So x minus 1 squared is x squared minus 2x plus 1, and that's going to equal 4. Let me go ahead and move this over a little bit so I'll have room. So that equals 4, because 2 squared is 4. That times x minus 1. Okay, the square root goes away because it's been squared. So then I have, let's go ahead and, distribute that 4. Alright, so I'll have 4x minus 4. I'm I'm going to bring everything over to one side. 2x plus 1 minus 4x plus 4 equals 0. Alright, combine like terms. So this negative 2x and that negative 4x, that makes negative 6x. And then plus 1 plus 4 makes 5 equals 0. Alright, so now I just need to do some factoring here. And so let's see, I need to think of two things that you multiply together, and you get 5, and if you add them together, you get negative 6, that's negative 1 and negative 5. Okay, and that equals 0. So if either of those two equals 0, the whole thing equals 0, so x equals 1, x equals, or x minus 5 equals 0, x equals 5. Add 5 to both sides. Okay, so now lastly, if you were to check both, let's just do this really fast. You can do it yourself as well. It's super easy to check. Just go ahead and plug in negative 1. So this would be a square root. So make sure when you're plugging in, you're plugging into the original equation. So the square root of 3 times 1, or not negative, so plug in 1. So 3 times 1 is 3 plus 1 minus the square root of 1 minus 1 is 0. Okay, that equals 2. So this basically says the square root of 4 equals 2. That checks out. Okay, so let's do the check for x equals 5. And we see that, so the square root of 3 times 5 is 15, plus 1 is 16, minus the square root of, 5 minus 1 is 4, equals 2. So this is 4 minus 2 equals 2, and that checks out. So your solution then, is both 1 and 5. Okay, and that's your solution.